Hi everyone, and welcome to my new playlist about data collection. If you watched the previous series about Power Query, you probably noticed how important it is to have the right starting point with data. The series is focusing at exploring different approaches to challenge the traditional way of collecting information, which is sending an email with or without an Excel attachment. In today's episode, we will be looking at Microsoft Forms, which is part of Office 365. The biggest challenge with data collection is the time we spend on it. How much time do you spend on average sending emails with requests and then having to save those responses, storing them somewhere, collating them into one big file, and then processing them further, whether it's to forward them to another person or for approval and so on. The second challenge in terms of data collection is data validation. How many times have you left it to the user to input what they think is right? Why not be more specific and try to insert some validation rules so that you get the data right first time? The third challenge around data collection is around security and data confidentiality. Do you want to let the other respondents see all the responses, or do you want to limit only to theirs? The traditional approach for data collection is for the accountant to request the data over Outlook. So they will send out a request in an email, they maybe will attach a file to it, and then people will reply with their own version of the file that's got the data. The accountant would then go and save it on a shared drive, and then they would manually collate all the files into one, and then manually continue the workflow. So they will forward the file or the files to another person or to a manager for approval and so on. The modern approach to data collection is to request the data via cloud. That means through sharing a link, and this can be done with Microsoft Forms or probably something you're already familiar with, Excel on Sharepoint. The advantage of that is that the data is already stored in the cloud on OneDrive or Sharepoint, and then we could use Power Automate to trigger workflows for notification approvals or emails. The episode today is not going to look at Power Automate, but I will be starting soon a playlist for that, so keep an eye on it. Before I go on and show you Forms, I would like you to keep in mind that Forms is a basic solution. So in terms of disadvantages here, it fits some basic scenarios, and it might be harder to tailor it to more complex scenarios, editing the fields so that you get certain data validation or data types. However, for the basic solutions, it offers two advantages that, in my opinion, outperform the disadvantages. The first one is security. So I think Forms works very well with scenarios where you're collaborating with other departments, and sharing an Excel on SharePoint where everyone inputs their data has its security risk because you don't want to let other departments see each other's data. The second main advantage is cloud storage. So what Forms will do for you, if you were to send the questions by email, you would have to collate them into one big file. Well, Forms does two things for you. Forms will collate all the data for you and store it in an Excel that's readily available for download. And this is a huge gain. To get started with Microsoft Forms, I'm here on my office.com page, and I'll click on the app launcher, and here I can see a list of all my apps. If you don't see all of them, you can always click on all apps and then select Forms. And this would take you to the Forms homepage. On the Forms homepage, I can see my recently accessed forms, and I create new ones. And I could also go to all my forms and see all of them. In order to create a new form, I could click on the button, but there's also an option to start with templates. However, here there is a bit of a glitch in terms of the page not showing the template. So what you'd have to do here is either start MS Forms from a Google search, and what you notice here is that the link here will display the templates at the top, and you can see the form of the link. If we were to compare to the previous one that we accessed from the Office apps, you can see that it's got a bit here that needs to be removed. So if I was to remove that and reload, I can see the templates. Unfortunately, a bit of a glitch. Clicking on the templates here would show me different categories. So for example, these are all pre-made and can be used straight away. Could have party invitation, could have a satisfaction survey, or we could have a vacation and sick leave form. However, for the demo today, I'm going to start with a new form. Before I go and create a new form, I'd like to show you a few examples where you could use Microsoft Forms. Finance can work on a multitude of projects with other departments. So one use case scenario could be an employee enrollment form for corporate cards, where you want to collect personal data. Another example could be where an accounts assistant has to set up new customer suppliers in the ERP, so they would collect company information. If we were to set up other master data like projects, for example, forms would not be necessarily suited because, for example, projects would have to be tagged to a list of customers. And although we have a choices field in Microsoft Forms, that is quite limited. Another example could be timesheets. So for example, I was working on an ERP implementation project and we had to collect how many hours each team member spent on the project. The issue with Microsoft Forms is that it doesn't have a repeating section. So if I wanted to submit multiple lines for my timesheets, I would have to submit it multiple times. Last case use scenario could be an intercompany confirmation where, for example, I would send to the other party my balance, and this would get collated into one big file that can then be used for an intercompany matrix. So let's get started with Microsoft Forms. Let's start creating a new form. As I mentioned, it doesn't work very well for timesheets, so I'm going to show you this two example in a bit, but I want to create a new form for intercompany confirmation. Now I could go here and click on new form, but this would enable me only to export the responses into an Excel file, but it won't be a direct link to that file. For this reason, we need a workaround. So the workaround would be to either go here to Excel on the web, and then we would create a blank workbook and then click insert forms, and that would take us to the forms interface. Or alternatively, I can go to OneDrive. So again, from the app launcher here, I could go to OneDrive and then I could create my file directly in here. So I could say forms for Excel and give it a name, the company confirmation. Create, and this would take me to the interface. Now if I was to refresh here, note that in both instances, whether I created a blank workbook or used new forms from Excel, in both cases the file gets stored on OneDrive. So what can we do in a form? Just to present you a bit of the interface, we can obviously add new questions here, and it's quite easy to do. So I click on add new, and I have here several options. It could be a choice, so multiple choice. It could be a text, but this also covers numbers. It could be a rating, a date, or it could have like could also attach a file, or this Likert, which is used to rate feedback, for example, from 1 to 10. So here, if I wanted to do, let's do a choice and say sender code, And then I can put the options here. I could also copy them, obviously. So here and copy paste ABC and can delete. Then it would be also very easy if I want to copy question and then add it down here. That's also easy. Receiver code. What else I have to do here? Currency, balance type, and amount. So I can add again a choice of currencies. So I could do currency and put in, let's say, usually currency you'd be, it'd be just one currency. You'd usually report in a consolidated currency. So probably this one is not needed. I'll delete it. And then I will just say choice of balance type. Right, and then my amount. Let's put in a text here and say amount. Now, I can make this a number. So if I click here on restrictions, I could say, yes, the value must be a number. Then for each question, I can also make it required. For choice questions, you can have multiple answers, but here, obviously, you only need one. Right, so basically this is my form, right? Very easy to do. And then when I have to configure it is I can have some options here in terms of settings. So who can fill this form? Usually it's only people in my organization, but forms is quite versatile in terms of you can also send it externally. For example, I've been to an NHS appointment and the consultants wanted feedback on the service they provided, so they actually gave me a QR code to scan and fill in a form. That's quite a very good use. And then here for accepting responses, you can have start end dates and so on. So a bit of flexibility there if you need to close the form at some point. Then if you have to share the form, you can do that. I'll show you in a moment. So if I was to start submitting some of the data, I can actually put the form in preview mode and actually submit a few values and show you how it works. So I already submitted a few answers, but I'll show you how to do it. So this would be the third one. So I'm going to select here some sender code, receiver code, type of the balance, and then I'll put in here an amount. And I'll click submit. And then obviously if you want to submit more, you can submit another response. But here for the time being, I will go back and look what happens now after I submitted my responses. I can click here on responses, and then you have a simple dashboard, but that shows you a few things. So it shows you have 3 responses, how much time it takes to complete, and then you can also see a split of the responses. This is quite useful. Now, what I wanted to get to is, I mentioned the storage is in the cloud. So you can see here I've got a button for open in Excel, but you can also see a cloud. That means this will open the file that I have stored here on my OneDrive. So if I was to go back here and click on open in Excel, it would open that workbook. And as soon as somebody submits another form, there'll be a new line here. See how good the information is that's stored here. You have the start time and completion time. You have the email of the person and the name of the person that submitted the form. And then you have the data for the form here. So this spares you a lot of time in having to collate that data. The last thing I want you to show here is how to collect responses, so how to share the form. You can click here on collect responses, and then what you can do, you can copy the link and email it to someone. You can send an invite via an email. And what I mentioned earlier is you can also have a QR code. So This is quite useful. Somebody can come to your desk, or you can set up a meeting if people don't know how to fill in the form. Take a laptop with you, and then you can share the QR code straight from your screen, and they obviously can fill it in also on their mobile, on their tablet, so they don't have to be at their laptop, which is quite good. I'm now back to my forms homepage, and I wanted to show you a bit here, how to deal with timesheets and see if this can work for you. So I have here a timesheet example where it's created based on, I've got a few simple questions. You can select the project as a choice. You can select the date for which you're submitting the timesheet, and then the number of hours and the description of work done. And I was saying earlier that this is a drawback for forms because it doesn't have a repeating section to allow me to input this data several times. So if my timesheet has 10 lines, I've worked on 10 projects in one day, I have to, submit it each times 10 times. The other example I had here is trying, to find a workaround to submitting it 10 times. You could have the date here, and then you could have a list of projects and how many hours you've worked in one day. So this is that type of Likert field, and I've got here the projects on the vertical and the hours on the horizontal, and I could say, today I worked on 2 projects, spent 2 hours on one project, 2 hours on one. Sorry, I have to go to preview. So I worked 2 hours on one project and then 6 hours on another project, but then I don't have a field where to put the description of the work done. So yeah, these are a few ways of getting around it, which might work, might not work, depends on the scenario. And then what I wanted to show you is if I was to create this using new form. See, when I go here to responses, there's nothing that's been submitted for this one. So let's go and quickly submit a few replies. So I'm going to say 10, and this is done. Right, so when I go here and look at my responses, you can see I have open in Excel, but there's no longer the cloud file. That means it's not a live Excel file. I won't be able to see that on OneDrive. I can still export, so I go to open in Excel, but then I'd have to download it. So that means every time you want to see the responses, you have to download the file, as opposed to, if you have it stored in OneDrive, you don't have to download it every time. You can just go to the file or send a link to someone, and they'll be able to see the responses there. Before we finish, a quick recap of advantages and disadvantages. We talked about advantages like security and cloud storage, and then in terms of disadvantages, I showed you about input validation. So there is that choices field there, but it's limited. If you have a big list of of entities, yeah, you could copy paste there, but it would take a while to scroll through, and I guess it can be done, but if you have 100 or more choices, it probably wouldn't be feasible. Then there's no possibility to edit responses after the submission. So with an Excel file, people can go back to Excel file, they would have access to it, and they could edit the responses here. The principle is that once they click submit, they can no longer alter the result, go back and edit. And then I showed you for timesheet that yes, it doesn't have repeating sections, so sometimes that could be a nice feature to have. I hope you have enjoyed this new playlist, and I hope it provides some insights into how to approach data collection. Please like and subscribe for next time as we continue our journey to explore new ways of collecting data and saving time. Thank you for watching.